Legend Total War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering the Ogre Kingdoms. And if it's one thing that the Ogre Kingdoms are all about, it's about consuming, which brings me to today's sponsor, which is Instant Gaming. So, I've been partnered with Instant Gaming for ages. It's not the first time we've given them a shout out, but with a lull with Total War Warhammer 3, I imagine that a lot of you guys will be looking elsewhere to fill up your pastimes. And if you're on a bit of a budget, Instant Gaming can be great to get, games really cheap. So I was having a little look on Instant Gaming to see if there was anything there that I very highly recommend at a really good price. And I came across an absolute doozy today. So, the Dawn of War franchise collection is currently 97% off at just $3.80. So what do you get with that? You get the entirety of Dawn of War 1 and its expansions, and Dawn of War 2. But you don't get Dawn of War 3, which I guess is fine considering it's the most hated game in the trilogy anyway. Now, of the Dawn of War collection, my favorite of this is Dawn of War Dark Crusade. That is probably the closest game to an actual Total War game, because you play on a turn-based campaign map and fight real-time battles. More along the lines of an RTS where you base build and stuff, and if you ever go back to the same map, any buildings that you had when you left the map will still be built there. So it's a really good game, Dawn of War Dark Crusade. I really enjoy it. Obviously, it lacks a little bit of the scope of Total War games. It doesn't have like a 300 odd regions. But Dawn of War franchise collection is an excellent game, and if you can get that for essentially Monopoly money, because that's in Australian dollars, by the way, then you can probably sink a good 100 hours into all of those games. But anyway, highly recommend Instant Gaming. If you're not so interested in Dawn of War, there's plenty of other games there. Just browse and see what you can find. Just be careful to check that you're purchasing in the right region. Otherwise, the key may not work on your PC. But at the same time, you can always refund it if you made an incorrect purchase. Anyway, let's get on with the tier list now. So the way that I've ordered this is based on buildings. So if we just go into Warhammer 3 at the moment, I've organized it so that we're doing it based on recruitment from the camps, based on the building chains. Okay, so starting with the Noblars. The thing is with Noblars is that they're super cheap, they're kind of trashy, but you can do a lot to boost them. So I'm actually going to put Noblars at A tier, both the just regular Noblars and the Trappers. So these guys here are particularly good because they have Stalk. So Stalk is just really useful on its own, and they're like the early game missile unit for the Ogre Kingdoms. And as for just regular Noblars, these guys here, they're actually quite good at defending settlements, because what you do with them is just have them hold positions and just allow towers to do tons of damage. So if you ever need to defend your regions in an emergency, recruiting a whole bunch of Noblars can actually be quite useful. And in terms of their defensive and offensive capabilities, for their price point, they're really not that bad. Moving on to the just regular Ogre infantry, we've got the Ogre Bulls here. So these guys, I used them in the early campaign just fine. I really didn't need to start replacing them until about turn 40. I think this is a solid, monstrous infantry, especially if you're going up against Cathaian factions. They don't really have that much that they can do against it. Even if they've got anti-large infantry, if you just throw in enough Ogre Bulls, you can rout them pretty quickly. So I'm going to put these guys also at A tier. One thing that you're going to notice with this tier list is that I'm going to be pretty favorable towards most of the units in this roster, because I think that the Ogre Kingdoms just have an all-round really strong roster. Okay, so then we've got other Ogres. We've got the... Hang on, let me just check exactly what these are called, because they've got a lot of redundancy in their infantry. So they've got the Ogre Bulls Iron Fists and the Ogre Bulls Dual Weapons. So the Iron Fist is kind of like a shield. That's what it sort of indicates there. Any unit that is considered an Iron Fist has a missile block. So these ones here, while they are an improvement on this type, I usually just skip them and go either straight to Iron Guts or various other building chains. So I'm going to put both of these under B tier, but you definitely can do it. The main thing here is that Ogre Bulls can be recruited really quite easily. Having to upgrade your military buildings in the early game is a little bit inconvenient, but I guess more towards the mid game, you can just very easily skip tier 2. I think that's the point there. So yeah, I usually just skip them. They're just not really needed. It's just, like I said, infantry or monstrous infantry redundancy. Then we've got the Iron Guts. So this is particularly good with Grease's Gold Tooth because he can reduce their upkeep cost by quite a bit and boost them. But for a tier 3 unit, they are just okay, really. So I'm gonna put them also at B tier. Obviously, if you're using them with Greases, they're probably going to be an A tier unit. But aside from that, I'd put them at B tier. Okay, then we've got the Maneaters here. So there's a whole bunch of Maneaters. Right, let's just go through all 4 of them at once here. So there is the regular Maneater. And I was having a look at the stat differences between regular Maneaters and Iron Guts. Also, this particular campaign was on large unit scale, so it's actually going to be like 16 entities. In terms of stats, they are definitely better fighters than the Iron Guts. This is why I put the Iron Guts at B tier, but Iron Guts' big thing is just having more armor than them. Now, I don't really value armor that much, so for a tier 3 unit, I do think that Maneaters are better than Iron Guts. So, I'm going to put Maneaters up in A tier. Okay, and looking at the other ones here, we've got the Maneater's Iron Fist. If you ever look at the stat differences, the only real difference there is a bit of extra melee defense and shield block. But for only 25 extra upkeep cost, I think that's pretty good. But it is a tier 4 unit, so you'll be getting them a little bit later on in the campaign. It doesn't take too long for the Ogre camps to recruit. I'm going to assume that most of these units you're just going to be recruiting from camps, because that's their primary purpose, I think. And then we've got the Man-Eaters with great weapons. So this one here is adding in bonus versus large. Now, it's a tier 5 unit. Now, normally you'd think for a tier 5 melee infantry unit, that's probably not the best thing ever. But it's only really ranked at tier 2, because it doesn't take the Ogres that long to get to a tier 5 camp. So where we're going to rank those, I'm going to put this one here at A tier, and the anti-large one at B tier, just because it's tier 5. By the time you get to this point, you have a lot of other options available to you, and I'd say that you just don't really need it. And then you've got the Ogre pistols over here, and surprisingly these are quite good. So these have the same combat stats as just a regular Man-Eater. It is a tier 5 unit, but they've also got a pretty decent range attack, so I'm going to put them also at A tier. None of these so far, I think, are worthy of the S tier ranking. Now we move on to the Cavalry side of things, which of course is going to be Monster Cavalry. So if we have a look at that recruitment chain, which is, which one is it? It's here. So we've got, here are the, there's 2 different types of cavalry in terms of functionality, right? You've got the Mournfang Cavalry, and then you've got the Crushers. So the Mournfang Cavalry being like your quote-unquote, lower tier cavalry. Mournfang Cavalry are really good, but you've got 3 different variants of them. So which one do I think is best? I usually value any kind of monster cavalry with an anti-large. So anti-large is really useful when dealing with cavalry on cavalry engagements, which I think is, if you're going to be using cavalry, you need to make sure you've got cavalry superiority. So if you're dealing with any kind of Slanesh units that are particularly fast, having your Mournfang Cavalry great weapons get in there and kill them super quickly can be useful, because you get rid of the enemy cavalry and then you can swing them around and smash into the enemy rear. So I'm going to value the Mournfang Cavalry great weapons the highest there. So that's this one. This one's going to go up to A tier. I don't think it's S tier worthy. And as for the other 2, I'm going to put them at B tier. None of these units I think are worthy of C or D tier yet. Like I said, the Ogre Kingdom's roster is just really solid. And then you've got the Crushers, right? Now, Crushers are very expensive if we have a look at them. Like $475 for the great weapons, anti-large variant. And then you've got the Crusher's Iron Fist. So that one basically got the shield block one, or you've got the anti-large one. Now, generally speaking, I value cavalry higher if it's a damage dealer as opposed to tanky. So an example of that is if you take the Empire, right, from Warhammer 1 and 2, and look at the Empire Knights. Like, they've got a lot of armor, but that armor doesn't really do much because it doesn't have a lot of killing power. Whereas if you take, for example, Bretonnian Knights, they are so much better than Empire Knights, because even though they've got less armor, they're faster and they hit harder, and so they kill the enemies quicker so they can move on to other targets. They're able to do a lot more. So I just don't really value a little bit of shield block and a little bit of extra armor. quite as much, but they're still very good units. Monstrous Cavalry are not the same as Horse Cavalry, right? So they're actually quite good, because the thing is with Monster Cavalry, they knock down so many units, and they don't get stuck so easily, so you can keep cycle charging them quite easily. Whereas with Horse Cavalry, they charge in, they don't really do much damage, then they get stuck, so you lose a couple of models every time you charge. You end up doing more damage to your own army than you do to the enemy, so it just ends up being an even trade-off, even when you're rear charging. So, the anti-large variant, I'm going to put that at A tier. Oh, you know what? Should I put it at Doomstack? The thing is, though, the units that I'm going to put it under S tier, I think are just... they're still here, so I'm going to leave that one at A tier and put this one here at B tier. Okay, still really good units. If you're looking for balanced builds, this is the way to go. Now we move on to the bit more specialist units. So, we've got the Saber Tusks. Now, Saber Tusks can become a Doomstack if you have enough... hunters in your army. You can essentially make them free of upkeep. But on their own, they're essentially the fastest Ogre Kingdom unit, so having a few of them can be very useful for running down enemy units. They're essentially a carbon copy of the White Lions of the High Elves. But I think these are very good units. I'm going to put them at A tier, because I think they've got a lot of utility. Don't expect them to take on heavier opponents. Their job is really to hit the light opponents, the fast opponents, and get rid of the routing units. So very useful for the Ogre Kingdom, since their main army resource requires you to run down routing units. So they're useful for gaining that. Then we've got the Gorges. Now, if I had made this video a few weeks ago, I would have been putting the Gorges at S tier. However, because they got mega nerfed, I really think they kind of belong in B tier now, because they've got fewer entities and lower damage output than what they used to. Now, Scrag can definitely make them an A tier unit with his reduced upkeep cost, but I think with their regular Lord, Gorges kind of got over nerfed. They're not bad units by any means, but they're just sort of in line with the rest of the regular sort of Ogre infantry here. No longer are they overpowered. Now we move on to the Giant. D tier. Do we really need to do another rating of a Giant? Giants are no different in Warhammer 3 than they were in Warhammer 2. They're stupidly slow, very easy to shoot. This is just a crappy tactical unit, and it's expensive. For a tier 4 unit, they're just not good troops. All they have going for them is whack, and like they can whack stuff. But they're so slow that sometimes they'll die before they even get into the engagement. And they've got essentially no armor as well, so they're not resistant to missiles. They can't dodge missiles. They're just an awful unit in terms of utility. If you're only going up against a full melee army, so for example, if you're just going up against Khorne, then maybe you could justify it. But even then, I would say it's a bit of a stretch. You've got better units in your roster in pretty much every single other unit here. Do not recruit Giants. Now, Stonehorns. I hate going up against Stonehorns, but I love using them. So these two are both S tier. Now, these are very expensive units. That's really important to keep in mind. But by the time you get to tier 4 and tier 5 with your camps, you should be able to afford them. And even just putting a few of these units in your army can make a massive difference. So really powerful units. The Harpoon launcher is only slightly more expensive than the other one. So this one's tier 4, this one's tier 5. But yeah, their utility is essentially the same. This one here having a missile attack. Very powerful units. And next up we got the Noblar Scrap Launchers. So this is a bit of a weird one, because it's a single entity artillery piece, right? I'm actually going to put this one at S tier. I don't recommend spamming them, but putting a few of them in your army, I think these are kind of overpowered, right? Because they're a single entity, which means that if they go into melee, they can't get their like goblins picked off, right? You can heal them with your gut magic, and like cavalry units charging into them barely do any damage to them. They've got a lot of armor, so they're decent in melee. They have like cluster shots that do absolute shit tons of damage to infantry, which I guess is kind of the main weakness to the Ogre Kingdoms, is going up against just a whole lot of spears. These guys here will just get rid of most of the spears. These are really excellent units when used correctly. Don't recommend spamming them. Getting a few of them is all you need. And they've actually got really good firing arcs as well, so really powerful unit. Then we've got, actually we'll do the lead belcher first. Lead belchers, I'm going to put that one at A tier. Just a really powerful unit. You can boost it by a ton. If you boost it like crazy, I guess you could argue that they go up to S tier. But we can't put everything in S tier. Actually, we've put just about everything in A tier. This is just a really good sort of artillery piece. It's at the same tier as the Noblast scrap launchers. You know, for a tier 3 unit, I think they do a really good job. They don't have particularly good range, but with 12 on large unit scale or 16 models on Ultra, shooting like 16 cannon shots at a time can be quite devastating. But once they go into melee, they're not particularly good, but that's not really what they're there for. They're also not particularly expensive as well. So I think A tier is where they belong. I would have put them higher if it wasn't for the existence of the Iron Blaster. Now, the Iron Blaster, which could also be called the Ass Blaster, because that's basically what it does, it blasts everyone's ass to smithereens, it's definitely an S tier unit. So the best units in the Ogre Kingdoms roster are the single entity artillery pieces and the single entity big old monsters, which is usually the case with most things, because these are, generally speaking, some of the most powerful units. Well, except for the Giant. Giant's an exception, because the Giant's a giant piece of shit. But yeah, Iron Blasters are able to be boosted like crazy. Like, we did an Iron Blaster Doomstack a little while ago. They can just absolutely destroy single entities, destroy infantry. There's really nothing that they can't shoot. The only thing you have to worry about, I suppose, is running out of ammunition. But once you have run out of ammo, both of these artillery pieces can go into melee, so they can really hit way above their pay grade, and that's what S tier is really all about. How much above their pay grade can they hit? And this one here, you know, having basic units basically kill it quite easily is one of the reasons why the Giants go down so so low all the time. It's because they're taken out by low tier units really quite easily. Like, every single one of these units here are faster than the Giant. It's the slowest unit in your army. Now, the Ogres, one of their main strengths, especially over Cathay, is just momentum and speed. And the last thing you want to do is just rush your entire army into battle while these guys here are just lagging behind, which is why it just doesn't belong in a Ogre army. Unless you're like using it to defend a town, maybe it'll do okay there. But yeah, I wouldn't put them in your standing armies at all. But yeah, that's the unit roster. They don't have any C tier units, I believe. Every single one of these units here can be made to really good effect, but I would just heavily avoid using the Giants. They're just not worth it. Anyway, that's the tier list. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this tier list, whether you agree or disagree. It's very different from the other ones. Usually, we've got, you know, some in every category, but I just don't feel like the Ogres deserved any in C tier. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys. Don't forget to check out Instant Gaming. There'll be a link in the description. Appreciate you, and I'll see you next time, fuckers. Bye.